Welcome back to the Nonprofit Hub podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Speer, and joining me today, I have two guests. We've got Joel Baugher, who's the founder of Dominion Strategy Group, as well as Jeff Kruszyna, and I hope I did that right,
You
uh,
did.
who is the founder at JMK Victory, and they also have a consulting practice together. So we're going to kind of talk to them both about that journey. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for hosting, Megan.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, Jeff, I'm going to start with you. Tell me a little bit about JMK and introduce yourself to the audience here.
Sure. So I'm Jeff Kruszyna. I've spent the last 20 or so years working primarily on the Republican political fundraising side of things at a major agency before jumping ship and joining forces with Joel to form KB Partners, which is our joint venture together. The JMK Victory side caters more to the Republican political conservative advocacy world, primarily through direct mail, but we do offer peer-to-peer text as well as digital email fundraising as well. Born and raised in New York, so out on Long Island. So my New York accent may come out here and there. But yeah, born and raised Long Island, went to college at SUNY Stony Brook, then got a job in the DC area where I've stayed for the last 18 years. So Virginia, Northern Virginia's become home. Yeah, I'll let Joel tell you a little bit about himself.
Yeah, Joel, welcome in.
So thank you. Very similar professional story, as a matter of fact, to Jeff's. So we've paralleled for a while. Also have about 20 years experience in the direct response marketing industry. I worked for a small firm and cut my teeth for over a decade, 12 plus years at nonprofits, missions organizations, charitable organizations, humanitarian groups, large and small. And from there, Jeff and I overlapped at a major agency in Northern Virginia, and I went from there to vice president of the founding firm in our industry, and that's when Jeff and I decided that we could do this on a different scale, and so we jumped together about a year ago to form KB Partners. Like Jeff said, I am born and bred in the Shenandoah Valley, still live there today. I can't imagine there's any reason I would leave. So yeah.
Well, good. If you didn't catch the thread with both of these guys being active in the political space, that's kind of the topic for today. And so I want to kind of frame the conversation with, obviously we're headed into the 2024 political season. Well, not headed in, we're here. Let's be honest, we're in it, right? And I think that obviously that creates some challenges for folks who are in organizations that lean political, whether that's a PAC or whatever whatever the topic may be. But it also presents some challenges for just general nonprofits in how to raise funds in a political year and when to get involved and when to say something and when to not. So I'm excited to kind of dig in and kind of find some practical advice for folks, especially as we ramp up into the fall with all of the campaign messaging. What does that look like, and what should our response be? So, Joel, I want to start with you. If a nonprofit is political, let's start there. What should that line be between supporting an individual candidate versus supporting their cause? Where do we start with that messaging to make sure that we're raising the correct amount of funds in the right way?
Well, I think football, college basketball fan, and so if a team feels like the other team has momentum, oftentimes you'll see on the field or the court a panic, right? And that's the last thing that an organization wants to do. Oh no, here comes an election year. We've got to pivot our message. We've got to lean into a candidate or a campaign. We've got to really align with organization A or B on the political side. I would advise against that. Instead, I would lean into the ideology that has acquired you those donors to begin with. You know, it's not as maybe sexy or dramatic, but my advice would be keep on keeping on, right? You know, if it makes sense to say in your messaging that this candidate or this party is right on these issues, then do it. But if that's not something that your donors are used to hearing from you anyway, that can be a red flag for them, and it can lead to mission drift. You know, chasing the news cycle is not something that you want to do as a nonprofit.
That's great. Jeff, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to what Joel was saying is kind of to paraphrase the old Reagan quote of the, you know, no pale pastels but bold colors of be true to, you know, your mission as an organization. Don't try to, as Joel said, chase the news is kind of the kryptonite on the direct response side of things. You're trying to be more evergreen. But definitely, you know, especially in this environment where people are very polarized, whether it's Trump or Biden or name your candidate, you know, just be true to your mission as an organization and kind of stick to it. Don't try to just glom on to, you know, whatever the latest, you know, trend is.
Now, the caveat there for me might be you do want to be cognizant and aware of the FEC schedule as far as your mail calendar goes. You know, so with primary dates coming up and with FEC filing deadlines coming up, the political side of things, candidates, campaigns, PACs, are going to be more present surrounding those dates in mailboxes and in inboxes. And so you don't want to get drowned out. So, you know, messaging, stay the course, timing, you know, be aware of those political dates.
Okay, so help me as a non-politically fundraising individual, help me understand what that means, because I could very much see, at least for me personally, right? I am already getting inundated with emails and things in my mailbox and text messages from all sorts of different political groups. What are those deadlines? What do we have to look for so that our messaging isn't getting lost and buried in the shuffle?
Jeff, you want to speak to that?
Sure. So I would kind of liken it to on the nonprofit side where you've got your big end of year push and or Christmas. So there's a lot more of them a lot quicker in succession. So like, yeah, we're filming this right before there's big primaries happening in West Virginia and Maryland. So if you turn on your TV or watch anything on YouTube, you're going to be inundated with ads for all the local candidates. All that to say, you know, as a nonprofit, you really want to be sort of speaking to the right audiences that are, you know, disproportionately going to know that, like, okay, it's political season, we're in a presidential cycle, so everything is now, you know, every organization feels like they have to take a political stance when that's not necessarily the case. Certainly for your ideological nonprofits, that's kind of baked in, but you know, to kind of speak to some of the things Joel had touched on, another, you know, famous political quote is "all politics is local." So especially when you're talking about you know, nonprofits that serve local communities, that's really kind of the bread and butter of, you know, where donors want to feel like they're making an impact in their neighborhood, their school district, whether it's giving to their local church, Catholic parish, what have you. So just being cognizant of all those things, kind of, especially in a year like this.
Yeah, and specifically to address your question, the specific dates that I have in mind are quarterly filing dates. So you're going to get more political messaging around now's the time to increase your gift because we've got a filing deadline of April 1st or March 30th, whatever. So end of March, end of June, and so on in the quarterly cycles. Obviously, you know, end of October is going to be a big hit for political mail, mid to end of October, and then your primaries. If you're a state-based, you know, nonprofit organization and you have some high-profile Senate primaries or whatnot, you're going to be cognizant of those dates as well.
So let's talk about specifically about that end of June one, because I know so many of our organizations, nonprofit in general, run on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. And so we see a huge push in the nonprofit space around that June 30th fiscal year end, you know, push campaigns that way. So if all of those orgs are up against the quarterly filings on the election cycle as well,
right?
How do we make our messaging stand out? How do we make sure that we're not getting buried when those two dates are going to line up together this year?
I would, they're not identically aligned. I would say, I would answer that in two ways. First, you know, if your typical push for end of year fiscal year giving is May 15th, I would say maybe push that mail date back to May 30th or April 1st. So you hit the beginning of the next FEC cycle and you're not so inundated with political mail. And the other advice I would give is might be a good time to test your formats. You know, my first response was to lean into your messaging that's gotten you there, right? And I stick with that. But if you have a higher cost or a higher profile, a higher touch format that's going to distinguish you from that political mail, now might be the time to use it. Typically, political mail is going to be your standard number 10 carrier envelope, number 9 return envelope, and it's going to look a lot of those political mailings for candidates and campaigns and PACs are going to look very similar. They're low cost, high volume mailings. So if just to get into the nuts and bolts, if you want to put your letter that you typically send out at the end of your fiscal year in a number 10, if you choose to put that in a number 12 or a 6x9, or even a more personalized A6, A7 type of format, as far as carrier envelope, just think about it, you know, tactically. If you're going through your mail that you've just gotten out of your inbox, you can flip through all of that, you know, and ignore it until you get to that differently sized or differently colored envelope, right? And it stands out a little more. So now might be the time to stick with your messaging, lean into your ideology and your mission, but test a little on format.
Yeah, I mean, just to dovetail a little bit on what Joel was saying, you know, while what we primarily do and nonprofits in general, like it's all kind of mass marketed. However, you know, we're trying to mimic it and make it look as though it's a one-to-one, like you're writing to your grandma sort of feel. So whether that's using, as Joel mentioned, a carrier envelope that looks like, you know, there's a birthday card or anniversary card or something in there. There's all sorts of technology now, and you've interviewed some folks as far as using that kind of real pen technology to mimic, you know, that it's coming from a real human being and not a mass mailing. Just to, again, try to stand out in the mailbox, because that's really the first challenge on the mail side, is to, you know, get that donor to put that aside and actually open it and read it instead of trashing it with the rest of, you know, their marketing mail.
Yes, studies have shown that you've got about 3 seconds in front of that donor, in front of that person who receives that envelope. So getting inside is 90% of the battle, right? And so you've got about 3 seconds to do that.
Wow, that seems so short. But I guess now thinking about it, if I'm flipping through my mail, I decide pretty quickly what's getting opened and what's going in the trash. So yeah, oh man, it's funny how often we do this as folks in the industry, right? Because as a creator of those types of things, as somebody who's handling that direct mail, if somebody's designing those pieces, we absolutely believe that everyone's going to pay attention to every piece we send them. It's going to have, this is going to be the one that grabs all of their attention, and we tend to ignore the way that we actually behave.
Right.
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 That's
Yeah.
funny.
So I absolutely recommend that you hand your sample to a non-direct mail person. If you're doing direct mail and you have a concept, print it out, fold it up as best you can, and then say, how would you interact with this?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
being in this space for so long, it's easy for me to be like, okay, well, like I know based on what postage is being used, if this is actually something personal or professional, whether it's a nonprofit indicia or a nonprofit stamp versus a full first class. And I'm like, all right, that's me being a direct mail nerd and knowing all these things, whether it's a real handwritten letter versus something printed on based on the bleed of the ink and things like that. So Joel's point is extremely valuable, and we've definitely done that with family members of like, what do you think of this, like hidden in a pile of like, here's my utility bill, here's a credit card bill, here's your HOA dues, and here's a direct mail piece. Like, see if it makes it through that kind of gauntlet of like, oh, this is something I want to open and read more about.
Yeah. So when it comes to obviously the volume of mail over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, we know it's going to increase, right? We know that all of our both physical mail inboxes as well as digital email inboxes are going to be more inundated than they ever have been. It's just a natural season of a presidential election year. So for the majority of nonprofits, is it time to double down? Where, if you normally send one mail piece a month, is it time to go 2 so that you are increasing the likelihood? Or is it time to pull back and maybe take a break off of direct mail for a couple months and focus somewhere else because you're going to get, there's so much volume, it's hard to stand out. What does that line look like?
Definitely not pull back. That I hardly ever recommend that to an organization. I mean, and Jeff and I were talking about this before we went on, which is, if you're a Maxwell House buyer and you go in every month to buy that can of Maxwell House from the supermarket, and you go in and it's not there, but you're out of coffee, right? You're going to pick Folgers or another brand. You're going to buy the coffee. So in your mailbox, if you have donors who are looking for your mail and it doesn't show up, right? Even if they're not aware that they're looking for it,
Sure.
But they're used to seeing your mail in their mailbox and it doesn't show up, but they have 3 other worthy causes in front of them who didn't pull back in this cycle, they're going to give, right? And you're going to miss that donation. And
that is
so
a great analogy. Ooh.
I would say instead of pull back, I would say maybe lean into multi-channel.
Okay.
And Jeff and I are direct mail guys, but like Jeff alluded to earlier, we're full service. So their consumers, donors are going to be more responsive, more used to seeing more emails, more texts during the political cycle. And so you're not going to be an anomaly to them if you move into the multi-channel fundraising. Now's a good time to do that. And if you're all digital, now's a good time to move into direct mail as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of again dovetail off what Joel was saying, there is, with the inundation of all the political mail, whether it's PACs or candidates specifically asking for money, that's also kind of rising tide lifts all ships. That's conditioning people to realize that, like, it's a season of asking for a gift. So while folks may be turned off giving politically, like, that doesn't mean that your nonprofit should stop and pull back either. Maybe they, instead of giving that $25 gift to some political organization, they decide, okay, well, I want to give to my, local crisis pregnancy center, or, food kitchen, or help a homeless veteran local charity, or, folks that are doing good in their local community. So just, conditioning folks to be generous
Right.
is kind of how I frame it.
I like to say, panic is the enemy in any situation, and there's this perception that presidential cycles impact charitable giving negatively, and it doesn't bear out. We've been doing this, like Jeff said, for 20 years each, and there is a lot of intuition and experience involved, but we're data driven, and in 9 out of the last 10 presidential political cycles, charitable giving has actually increased in those years. And so I'd lean into it, stick to your ideology and messaging that donors are used to seeing, and don't pull back on donor acquisition even, and especially house mail.
Yeah. So I want to piggyback off of that, Joel, and ask this. So I feel like the tendency would be, especially all the time, but especially in an election cycle, if you are a group, actually, like Jeff was just talking about, let's use the local food pantry, right? You're the food pantry in the town, food kitchen, homeless kitchen, whatever, something along those lines. There's very little political about that, right? Because homeless people need fed regardless of the election year, regardless of who's in power, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder if there's a pressure that organizations are feeling to take a side, right? And if there's any wisdom to that, or, does it alienate too many people if you start to get that political messaging in there?
For an organization like that, and I've worked with those groups, and I wouldn't take a side. That wouldn't be my recommendation, but I would touch on the issues, and you could message it to the degree that you're comfortable by saying, you're seeing this issue on the news, you're reading about this issue in the paper. I mean, you want to remain relevant and be current and be talking about the things that people are thinking about in the news cycle. But for a strictly humanitarian organization, like a rescue mission or a food bank, I think there's a risk in that. And again, my term for that would be mission drift, right? I mean, it's not worth that risk to name names, but it is worth it to lean into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so to use that example, as far as a food pantry, hitting on, the prices of groceries are higher. Inflation is hurting everyone. The price at the pump is higher. So imagine if you're a homeless veteran, like how much harder it is to, survive, and the great work that your organization is doing to provide those meals. And I mean, from a fundraising background, like, yes, then your cost to operate that food kitchen is higher because the cost of goods is higher. So then there's a need for more donations. So it's always trying to frame it in a, like, hey, it normally costs us, say, $10,000 a month to operate. Now it costs us $15,000. So we need, to make up that shortfall of that $5,000 somehow. So, asking for that $25 gift maybe becomes asking for that $35 gift. And generally speaking, the folks that we're primarily talking about speaking to are the 70, 75 year and older retired folks that are kind of in that life cycle of giving, where they're trying to, leave a legacy and just be in that kind of mind frame of giving.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can lean into the extent that you can say things like, I know your mailbox is full of candidates asking for money. I know that your inbox is full of rhetoric right now, those sorts of terms, just to connect and say, hey, we're still here. We still have needs. Maybe instead of $50 to a candidate, you give $30 and save that $20 that you usually give to us.
Yeah, I mean, because, and I've used this or a version of this line and copy through the years. Like, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue, like where we need to help either help our wounded warriors or, insert your cause. Because it's true, like these, especially at the local level, that, where, again, using the food pantry example, like this is actually helping your neighborhood and filling a need that exists that politicians of both parties maybe are not addressing. But that's coming from our point of view, the kind of free market of nonprofit organizations kind of filling a need that exists, and folks definitely want to make an impact in their local community regardless of right versus left.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something that you had mentioned in terms of diversifying, right? So I know you guys are the direct mail guys. And a lot of organizations that are traditionally direct mail heavy may not have a strategy around text giving or text campaigns yet. Is an election year the time to start that? Or are people getting so annoyed by the amount of text messages that they're already getting that now is maybe not the time to start a text campaign if it's not something your audience is used to?
Say now to start a text campaign and just test it, knowing that maybe your testing analysis might be a little skewed, as you go forward. But I would say people are jaded with text, yes, but there's a comfort level, right? When you're getting so many, and I think now's the time to put your toe in the water if you haven't yet.
Yeah, I mean, we always, whenever approached by a new potential client, no matter if it's a nonprofit or political, and they ask like, when's the best time to start? It's always the sooner the better, because thinking of it in the terms of a long game, and sort of something Joel had mentioned earlier in this conversation was kind of the building upon kind of the lifetime of that donor. The sooner you can get them in, the sooner you can cultivate them to give that second, third, fourth gift and upgrade them over time. So it's sort of having the long view, not just, okay, what am I going to do in the next 6 months because we're in the heat of a political season. So I think the natural inclination of a lot of folks is sort of, bury their head in the sand and wait until after the political season's done, and then like, shock and awe after. And in the meantime, the charities that have kind of bucked the trend and gone all in are now kind of in the driver's seat, because folks are now used to hearing their name, seeing their logo, whether it's on email or postal mail, like we're talking about.
So to the point on email, and I guess I'll ask the same question that I would have, or that I did with direct mail, is now the time to ramp up email? If you've typically been doing 1 a week, is it the time to go 2? Again, with the understanding that inboxes are so overflowing, is more better when it comes to email?
And so, if you're on message,
Hold
if
on.
you're
Joel, I'm going to have you start that answer again, because I don't know what happened to the beginning of your audio. Kevin, if you can take that part out, that'd be great.
So the answer to that for me is that the donors will let you know, right? So the great thing with text and email is that you can get that analysis pretty quickly. But the same holds for direct mail, right? As long as you're on message, on ideology, there's no mission drift, you're not panicked in your conversations with your donors, you're remaining true to who you are as an organization, then frequency is something absolutely I think you should test across all channels, really. And if it's too much, donors will tell you that. You'll see a dip in response. You'll see an increase in feedback. Just make sure that you're applying that response to how you're communicating with them, and it's a relationship, right? So if your ex is texting you too much, you're gonna say, "Stop texting me," right? Where you're gonna get that same kind of message from your donors. So listen to them.
Yeah, and you know, our all our mutual friends over at Next After do thousands and thousands of tests, and so that's you know, taking a data driven approach is smart. And I'm sure, without quoting the actual study, I'm sure Next After has probably published a study on timing of you know, messaging, whether it's on the peer to peer text side, email, or the direct mail side. So they're a great resource, just in general, for nonprofits across the board.
Agreed. Shout out Next After. Love those guys. All right. So as we wrap up today, I want to ask both of you for your kind of your last minute 2 cents. If you are speaking to, let's say, the executive director or the development director for a nonprofit, what is your one takeaway that they need to make sure they're keeping in mind as we enter the next kind of 6 to 8 months of political overload? Joel, we'll start with you.
I think I've said it in a couple different ways, but just, stay on message. Don't panic. Be cognizant of mission drift, right? And lean into formatting. Go back to packages that have worked before, but maybe tweak the formatting a bit to stand out a bit more. And one point that I think is salient to this conversation is I would recommend keep your powder dry. There's this phenomenon called rage giving. You've probably heard of it, where after a presidential election, the ideology, not the candidate or the campaign, obviously, but the ideology of the losing party has a massive bump year over year in fundraising, to the tune of about 57% over the previous year. So, if Trump wins, you might see a lot of donations to Planned Parenthood or Greenpeace or those types of organizations. If Biden wins, you might see a lot of Gun Owners of America donations or right-leaning ideology gifts that have a bump. So you want to be, you don't want to spend it all thinking I've got to push this mail out in a panic-driven messaging approach before the election. Keep some of your powder dry and plan for Q4, end of Q4.
That's
Yeah,
great.
I mean, I think the only thing I'd add to that really is kind of keeping the long view in mind. It is an investment to do any sort of direct response fundraising, whether it's through mail or digitally over email and now text. So thinking in terms of like the value of bringing in donors right now as we're in spring, like what that will mean in the summer, fall, into kind of the end of year giving, where Q4 is generally where nonprofits thrive in that end of year giving mode, because again, folks are conditioned to give at that time of year. So yeah, keep play the long game would be my kind of key takeaway from the conversation.
That's great. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate those perspectives. If somebody had some questions or wanted to follow up or, wanted to touch base with you, how would they find you? Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. So we're on all the social medias. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Our website is kbpartners.org. So you can find both JMK Victory on the political side and Dominion Strategy on the nonprofit side.
Excellent. Well, good. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thanks for being with us. This has been another episode of the Nonprofit Hub podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Speer, and we'll see you next time.